I'm going to talk about Ethiopian mission in general, but I use the ministry we have here as a sample, and then also explain about the Ethiopian, especially Ethiopian mission in the diaspora here in Los Angeles and beyond. And I use two terminologies sometimes, which is diaspora and then immigrants. Most of the Ethiopians, we prefer to use the word diaspora because that is a way we see ourselves dispersed around the world because of many reasons I'm going to describe. And then most of the first generation immigrants, they not only consider themselves as dispersed diaspora immigrants, but they wish that one day they will go back, which is just, that is their way of thinking. I want to talk about this ministry in two levels. One is from my personal experience, and then the second is about the immigrant mission overview here, and then the last section talks about the challenge, because this is an opportunity for us to name those challenges which we face as an African or Ethiopian immigrant here in the United States, especially as Lutheran immigrant Africans here. I would like to briefly introduce to you the Ethiopian diaspora mission through my personal experience as an immigrant and immigrant pastor. I've been ministering to Oromo-speaking immigrants, Ethiopian communities here in Los Angeles beyond for more than 12 years. I came to the life of the immigrant ministry beginning of 1999 when I went to Germany as a ecumenical volunteer through the Makanesus Church. Makanesus Church is one of the Lutheran church in Ethiopia. They sent me to Germany in partnership with local Lutheran churches in Germany. I went to Germany as a communicable international reverse practitioner by the Ethiopian Evangelical Church Makanesus, and later student of theology in Berlin. It was here that for the first time I got an opportunity to minister to the Oromo Ethiopian immigrant communities beside my voluntary work and studies. I was surprised to discover so many people from my home country who speak my language, shared my experience and worship with a flair and with a language and culture I used to worship in my own home congregation. It offered me a kind of familiar social, emotional, spiritual environment, not only where I overcame my homesickness, but also proceed to practice my Christian faith the way I understand better. But you can imagine what that means for most of the immigrants who were driven out of their home countries under dehumanizing circumstances, passed under harsh conditions until they reach Europe. I went to Europe as a student. I are mostly privileged, but thousands of immigrants here in the United States or in Europe traveled, went through a lot of suffering and transit countries like Kenya, Sudan, and then maybe even Arab countries. For most of, this is my congregation. I just want to use this as an illustration. And we do a lot of stuff. We like food. In my culture, we say that God communicates to people through food. That's what we say. And which is, so it's mostly that I want to say in one word, for us, a church is a place of celebration. A church of celebration of everything. It could be a fellowship around the word and sacrament, baptism, and also a communion where we have a fellowship together. And I just want to give you an overview of the Christianity in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has 9 federal states, and all those 9 federal states were, according to the language or language boundaries. For example, the Oromia, mostly they speak Oromo, and then the northern part, they speak Amharic, and then the very tip speak Tigrinya. So when we come to United States, most of the times that is why we have different language groups worshiping in different language because of this background. They come from different cultural backgrounds, but still and then you can see this. For most of Ethiopians who flee harsh political repression and economic poverty, America is a beacon of hope. They conceive and hope, in contrast to those harsh political and economic situations they endure in Ethiopia, America would offer them another or a better or a much better way to live. These immigrants brought this hope closer to reality by saving all of their monies, giving back all their possessions to pay their transition to Ethiopia. If you ask any immigrant coming from Africa, especially Ethiopia, most of them are young generation. I will talk about that. And then they come to United States even under hard circumstances, passing through hardship, and then paying a lot of money with the hope that they would have a better life here in the United States. Usually places that offer such people and usually places that offer such hope and familiarity for those new immigrants are often churches like Ethiopian fellowships in various cities of the United States. These immigrant churches and fellowships offer new immigrants familiar social and emotional, spiritual environment. People of their home country who speak the same language with whom they could easily communicate and have identity. It is here where they encounter hope through Christ and promise of tomorrow that our president talks most of the time. Under the missional leadership of our district, Reverend Larry, and his mission team, our district has done an exemplary work in cultivating and resourcing many of such churches for installing hope and transformation lives of hundreds of immigrants, I would say new Americans. One of such immigrants is an Ethiopian immigrant. In our district, we have about 11 fellowships and congregations hosted by our Lutheran congregation here in our district. And this number may increase in few years as immigrant population adds up through family reunion, new arrivals, and many, especially new arrivals. Especially since 1991, most of the young people arrive in the United States through a family reunion and diversity lottery, what we call diversity lottery, and so on. So this is, if you see the statistics of the Ethiopians overall, this is where they are dispersed in the world, especially since 1991. And the largest population of Ethiopians live in Washington, in United States. But if you see, the second one is in Saudi Arabia. And those in Saudi Arabia are not necessarily Muslims. They are also Christians. But they go there for the sake of work and so on. But eventually, most of them end up in the United States. I was in Germany. Most of my members, some of them were even in Russia, in Germany, in other part of Europe, but eventually they end up in the United States. And we have a lot of Oromo or Amharic-speaking congregation as our one because of these reasons. And this is, I just took this from the US Census, and that is the figure we have here in the United States. And Ethiopia is the second largest African immigrant in the United States. The first one is Nigeria, and the second one is Ethiopia. So this is the cities where most of the Ethiopians are situated in the United States. And the largest population is and for obvious reason in Washington, D.C. And the second one is Minneapolis, Seattle, and here in Los Angeles. And we have almost in every cities. And we have almost, for example, in terms of Oromo-speaking congregations, we have almost a small fellowships or congregations almost in every city of the United States because of these reasons. And the Minneapolis, just want to say something very important to us, especially when it comes to the Oromo immigrant in Minneapolis. Most of them went there because of the involvement of Lutheran Immigrant Service, transporting most of them from Kenya, Sudan, and settled them in Minneapolis. And then when they were settled in Minneapolis, then they pulled all their families and from other parts of the world, and we have the largest congregations in Minneapolis, Lutheran congregations, I think more than 3 now. And then Washington, D.C., Seattle, and Los Angeles. And this is what happens in my congregation. Also in other Oromo-speaking congregation, I have my colleagues there in Los Angeles, from San Diego. I have 2 pastors from Las Vegas, representing the Oromo-speaking congregations here. And I want to thank especially the faith community and their pastor for welcoming them and giving me a space. I will talk about them. So. It was since 1970 that most of the Ethiopians migrated to the United States, but it has 4 phases. And it's also that you can see in the congregation. The first generation who came in 1970s were all the generations, all the elite of the society. Mostly they are very conservative and tend to be mostly the Orthodox background, or even if it is from the Lutheran congregation, they are mostly older people. And this was in 90s, from 70s, from 1970 to 80, because of harsh pressure, persecution and church and persecution from the government in 2 terms. One is religious, and the other one was political persecution. But after 1991, there was another phase of immigrants from Ethiopia. These are mostly young people, under 30. I have somewhere the graphics, but it's mostly young people. Today, most of Ethiopian, including the Oromo and Amharic-speaking congregations, even the Tigrinya, I would say more 65% of the members are young people. So young people migrating to United States under hardship conditions. From my personal experience, there is 2 things which I just want to mention. From my experience, 2 trends stand out often that makes me grateful and proud to being a Lutheran. 95% of more than all of, especially Oromo-speaking Ethiopian diaspora Lutheran churches and fellowships are hosted, supported, or in some kind of fellowship with local Lutheran congregations. For example, here in Los Angeles and other parts of the world too, including some non-Lutheran immigrants. Because most of the congregations are pastored by mostly ordained in Ethiopia, Lutheran pastors who migrated to the United States. Today we have more than 100 Makanesus, I would say pastors, or I would say ordained pastors living here in the United States. In the US and few, and then we have also others who are still studying in the universities or in our seminaries. In the past, most of these Ethiopian or Oromo diaspora Lutheran congregations in US were affiliated with ELCA because of the historical link between ELCA and the Ethiopian Makane Jesus Church. But the radical theological confusion shift in the ELCA has greatly affected most of the congregations as they try to respond to the situation. It has caused conflict and unnecessary divisions, confusions among most of our Lutheran Ethiopian immigrants. to the extent that it terminally damaged missionary efforts of some of the congregations. When the first Ethiopian immigrants, especially the Lutherans, when they came to the United States, because of the historical link between ELCA and Makane Yesus Church, they were affiliated with, directly with ELCA, and then they established mostly many small congregations, big congregations. We even have congregations in Washington, D.C., in Seattle, more than 500 people. But when this thing happened there, it affected everything. It affected the small congregations, the big congregations. It caused confusion, division, and even to the extent of damaging outreach effort of this congregation into some areas. For example, in transition countries where I call Kenya, Sudan, Egypt, in Ethiopia. So whatever happens in this fellowship or body of Christ eventually will affect every one of us, even the immigrant communities. That is a sad reality of in which we live. And has a number of Ethiopian diaspora increases, Eliezer, out of the need of coordinated ministry, two mission societies were recently established. Before I want to talk about that, when this thing happened, most of these Amharic or Oromo-speaking congregations, they had a long consultation among their members, and then some of them decided to join Missouri Lutheran Church. That is why we have now large number of Oromo-speaking congregations joined already, and some in the process. And for example, 3 congregations from Las Vegas were formerly ELCA congregations, but because of this reason, they moved to Missouri Lutheran Church. In San Diego, the same thing. And then we have other congregations in Arizona, is also the same background. And even there is a big congregation which recently joined Missouri Lutheran Church from the big cities like Washington, D.C., and so on. Let me show you the graphics we have about that. So this is Ethiopian fellowships in this district. We have almost in every cities. We have our pastors here too. Yeah. So, for example, in case of the Oromo-speaking congregations, these are all the fellowships we have around the state who already joined or in partnership with the local Missouri Lutheran congregations. And some of them, we call them fellowships because they are not yet really fully established congregations from our understanding. There are some which are already established congregations. And these are the numbers, the statistics they have. And as a number of these, and we are trying our best to present ourselves and introducing ourselves through, especially to what we call Oromo Mission Society. There are 2 mission societies, Oromo Mission Society, and then also there is another Ethiopian Mission Societies. Oromo Mission Society focuses on the Oromo-speaking congregations in the United States, and then Ethiopian Mission Societies in general may include this one, but mostly also Amharic-speaking congregations. The idea is just to support already established fellowships and congregations to be organized, to have a coordinated ministry, and also sometimes to facilitate, for example, if a group of people situated in Las Vegas or in Arizona, and then this Oromo Mission Society or Ethiopian Mission Society will reach that group and then find the way they can relate to specific local congregations, at the same time get a pastor. It's mostly a coordination of mission. There's nothing else. So that is what I want to conclude with this. I will say something. This is what the trend. If you see that the church in Ethiopia is a church of young people. It's, I would say, maybe more than 70% are young people. And then these young people, the other one you see is migrating to North Europe, and with a ship. And some ended you know the story. I don't want to go into details. So most of them end in my congregation. If you see here, these are people from my congregation. The one you see on the other side, he's the old generation person. He came to the United States about, I don't know, maybe about 35 years ago. But he came from Europe and settled here in California. But these are young people coming from Ethiopia and then settled here in Los Angeles. So we have predominantly young people. It's also very important especially for hosting congregation to understand this dynamic. That is the way to approach them and finding a conducive space for them to have a worship space. This is what I would like to underline at the end of my presentation. These immigrant population are a great mission opportunities, both locally and globally. I want to say, you see from the presentation, from previous presentation, you see there is the mission possibility has two dimensions. One is a local mission opportunity at the front door of your church, but the other one is the global opportunity. So the immigrant mission, the immigrant community here in Los Angeles, which would be an Oromo, Amharic, or even Hispanic, they are mission posters. That is what we will say. They are mission posters. Each one of them have outreach ministries, including my own congregations. When when the first immigrant population increased around 1991, most of our pastors gathered in Washington, D.C. and established a kind of association. The idea of the association was to support immigrant ministry here in the United States, but at the same time organize the immigrant churches to do mission works in Ethiopia. And then they have built a lot of small congregations here in the United States and then even in transition countries. So I want to finish by naming three challenges which I don't know why. Okay, that's it. I would like to read these challenges, not to create confusions. I would like to conclude my presentation by naming three major challenges that often frustrate and limit the joy of the nations for most of Ethiopian immigrants and fellowships and congregations in the United States. Number one, lack of ministry resources and conducive worship space. That is obvious. And the other one is, which is really serious, is different liturgical expressions in the theological forms and spirituality. Most of our Ethiopian immigrant Christians, all even African immigrants, come from charismatic Christianity background, including the Lutherans, except those of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Hence, most of the new immigrants, especially the young, have hard time to understand and just into USA Lutheran liturgical church theology and worship. On the other hand, when the Ethiopian diaspora Lutheran expresses their Christian faiths in a language and customs and forms of spirituality aligned to most of our USA Lutheran congregations, it often creates misunderstanding between them and hosting congregations. Most of our churches generally prefer worship lives that is spontaneous, experiential, and expressive, rooted both in culture, at the same time, what we call charismatic or and tradition. And then the problem in the global South Christianity is there is a blend of charismatic worship, Pentecostalism, and all is blended together. And for the young people, it's very hard to differentiate this and understand. So it requires mostly non-judgmental understanding and proper guidance from the hosting congregations. And the other one is lack of compassionate and mission-driven cross-cultural leadership. Most of the time, those small congregations are not really relevant to their specific communities because of lack of this cross-cultural ministry or skill to do it. That's all.
Thank you very much, Gemechu.